Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. World leaders gathered in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil on the 6th and 7th of July for the 17th BRICS Summit. They held productive discussions on various issues on the BRICS agenda, including reform of global governance, enhancing voice of the global south, peace and security, strengthening multilateralism, developmental issues and artificial intelligence. Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed key sessions, one on reform of global governance and peace and security, and the second one on strengthening multilateralism, economic, financial affairs and artificial intelligence. So from pushing for a reformed UN Security Council to securing climate finance and technology access for the global south, from raising a powerful voice against terrorism to calling for responsible innovation in artificial intelligence, the Prime Minister laid out a compelling agenda that resonates with the priorities of developing countries. Besides, the Prime Minister also made significant suggestions on how to make the BRICS platform even more effective in this increasingly multipolar world. So we'll break down the key takeaways from Prime Minister Modi's interventions at the 17th BRICS Summit and what they signal, particularly for the global south, with two distinguished guests joining us on the program. I'm pleased to welcome Ambassador S.R. Tayal. He's a former senior diplomat. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us on the program. I'm also pleased to welcome Dr. Stuti Banerjee, Senior Research Fellow, Indian Council of World Affairs. Dr. Banerjee, glad to have you with us on this broadcast. So we'll start with the Prime Minister's session first on global governance. Ambassador, your thoughts first. The Prime Minister made the assertion that 21st century software cannot run on 20th century typewriters. And this, of course, was made in context of the urgent reforms that the Prime Minister referred to about the global institutions. He said it's high time that these global institutions undergo significant reforms to reflect contemporary realities. How significant, according to you, is it that BRICS collectively echoed India's call for reform of global governance of bodies like the UN Security Council, the IMF, the World Bank, and so on?
I think it is important for us to note that the composition, the character, and the objectives of BRICS have been changing over the years. In 2007, it emerged first as a pressure group within group of 20 because the G7 countries used to come with their own agenda. Okay. But with the Johannesburg summit 2 years back, when 5 more countries were added and a lot of partner countries were added, the BRICS has changed itself or evolved as a spokes body for the global south. And there, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and India's foreign policy is already positioned as a very strong spokesman of the global south, as the world saw in G20 when it was held in 2023 in India. So the current focus of BRICS is entirely in tune, in line, in conformity with the foreign policy convictions of Prime Minister Modi. Now, there are two aspects. One, on this major topic about the global peace and security and reform of global governance, Prime Minister Modi was absolutely right and very, very in a punching kind of sentences. He said that the last century's typewriter cannot be used for this century's computer systems, etc. Now, the issue is that the entire global south is united, that Security Council should be reformed, IMF should be reformed, WTO should be reformed, because the world has changed, but still the dominant power there, decision making in these organizations, is still with the rich north. And repeatedly, India, along with other friendly countries, other strong, powerful members of the global south, has been making these assertions, and Prime Minister Modi's leadership in this reforms of global institutions in this direction is acknowledged and respected and recognized. And we see that Prime Minister Modi's suggestions have found reflection in the declaration also. Reforms of the institutions, then also a very strong statement by our Prime Minister in that session against terrorism has also been very much taken aboard by the 10 members of the BRICS, and the issue of Pahalgam, that very tragic terrorist attack in Pahalgam has been
Certainly, Ambassador, we'll come and discuss, come back and discuss the peace and security aspect. Let me bring in Dr. Banerjee here, get her perspective on the global governance aspect, and especially in context of the reforms of global institutions that India has been speaking about for so long. But the fact that it's no longer just about unequal representation. The Prime Minister this time went on to add, without mincing words, that it's now more about credibility of these institutions. Dr. Banerjee, how do you think that given the slow pace of reform, we've been reiterating the fact that countries that matter to the world, countries that are playing vital role in global economy, in the global order, must be represented at the decision-making table. But that's not been happening. What can countries like India do on a platform like BRICS to build momentum on something so vital, but something that the global north and countries that hold the power have not been allowed to do?
So I think one of the reasons that we have actually started talking about this beyond the UN and beyond other forums in, coming together in platforms such as the BRICS is because these are issues which are of importance to the global South countries. Right. So we are raising them in platforms where the global South actually represents itself. So we build a very tight-knit consensus of what we want, and thereafter we present it to the world saying this is more or less the same thing that all of us want to. You have to pay attention to us. And I think, yes, you're right. We have raised the issues of, reforms of the UN Security Council, reform of the International Economic Order for a very long time. But I think for a very long time, we were just ignored because it was something that we were, just asking. But now the situation, both politically and economically in the international order, has changed, So we are now not just one of those countries which is demanding or asking for this. We are one of those countries which is now has a political heft. We have economic power, we have military power. So when we now come onto the table and say, we need to reform these institutions, both political and economic, it comes with a certain power, and now the world is actually taking it much more seriously. And because we have that momentum going, India is taking the other countries along with it, taking their suggestions, their ideas, because as has been said by the Prime Minister, not just in the G20, but for a very long time now, that there is an equal role by all countries in this. The global South needs to be equally represented. Therefore, the concerns of all countries there should be a consensus of what the concerns are. Therefore, we need to put them together. So I think as the BRIC moves forward, this momentum is going to go forward because you have a majority of the countries of the UN coming together now saying that these reforms are very needed. And as the minority, the global north becomes a minority, there would be a time if they want to save these institutions, they would have to now start reforming them. That's the only way they will go forward. We've reached a stalemate. So way forward is to reform them, rebuild them, making sure that there is more representation of the now realities, both in the economic and the international political scenario, which needs to be represented, because those are the concerns of the global South, which may not necessarily align with the global North.
Absolutely. Ambassador, given your experience, do you think BRICS, with its growing influence and its expanding membership, it's walking the talk, it's giving representation to a lot more countries on its fora. Do you think now raising issues of governance reforms at the global level can act as a credible pressure and influence reforms at the global level all this while, or perhaps in the last decade, India has raised this issue several times, and something that Dr. Banerjee also said. But now we've reached a situation where it's stalemate. It's not just about representation, it's about credibility of these institutions to a lot of these countries in the global south, of which India is now trying to become the voice and which need representation at the highest decision-making table.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi very clearly said that the global south is victim of double standards.
Yes.
Both for distribution of resources and on security matters. Now, this is a common experience of all the developing countries, of all the countries of the global south. So, a fora like BRICS, Group of 77, even non-aligned movement, they try to articulate these concerns of the global south and put a unanimous or a very convergent point of view in the fora, whether it is United Nations, General Assembly, Security Council, or World Bank, etc. But one has to be realistic. It is a very long-term project that UN Security Council would be reformed. Even in the World Bank and IMF, there are lots of changes expected, but unlikely to happen very soon. Because the one thing is that the global south itself is not very united. They are not speaking with one voice.
True.
And African Union has its own views, and a lot of coffee club is there, and they want an increase only in the permanent members of the UN Security, non-permanent members of the UN Security Council. So the grouping like BRICS and this kind of articulation, where in the declaration adopted yesterday, it says that the BRICS countries recognized or supported the aspiration of Brazil and India to play a greater role in the UN, including in the UN Security Council. So this is a tangential endorsement of India and Brazil's aspiration to be permanent members of the UN Security Council.
Certainly.
So I'll say
yes,
that it is not likely to happen very soon, but India, Brazil, other countries who are aspirants for permanent membership, as well as the entire global south, should continue to sustain this pressure on the naysayers in the United Nations, particularly the veto power holders. And only then this aspiration, a very legitimate aspiration of the global south to have adequate representation in these important global bodies, would be achieved.
Absolutely. But that consistent push which is required, of course, is being made by India. Ambassador, the Prime Minister made a strong reference to the Pahalgam terror attack, something that you touched upon in your first answer. The Prime Minister called terrorism, and particularly this incident, not just an attack on India, but on the entire humanity. How do you view the fact that the group, BRICS, not only condemned the attack, but also backed India's call for zero tolerance against terrorism? Does this mark a shift in the group's collective stance on security threats, and especially on issues of terrorism that India has been dealing with for decades?
Yes, it reflects that the 10 members of BRICS fully appreciated India's concerns, India's apprehensions, and India's caution expressed by Prime Minister Modi, that this is a scourge and all the countries of the world must continue to fight and not have double standards. And he also said that the world should not fight shy of imposing sanctions, and that was a hint towards Pakistan, which was earlier in the grey list of Financial Action Task Force, but was 3 years ago removed from that list, that it should again be placed in the United Nations Security Council Financial Action Task Force list. Here, I would also like to note that 3 members of BRICS, Iran, Russia, and China, are also members of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And we all recall that just a week back, when there was a defense ministers meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization hosted by China, then there was no mention of Pahalgam in the declaration, and because Pakistan is also a member there, and our Raksha Mantri refused to sign that declaration, and then it was not adopted. So it shows either some change in the position of China, particularly, which we need to consider, welcome, and reflect that this is a very good sign that China has agreed to this very strongly worded statement in the declaration, which reflects fully what our Prime Minister Narendra Modi said in very strong views on against terrorism.
Certainly. Dr. Banerjee, I'll take a related question from you as well, because the Prime Minister's remarks on terrorism were unambiguous. He called out those who provide safe havens and finances to the terrorists. But within the BRICS framework, how important, how feasible is deeper cooperation, especially on counter-terrorism, given differing national security doctrines, given different approaches that each of the members have on issues of terrorism, and something of which the ambassador spoke about?
I think when we're talking about terrorism, yes, there is a subtle difference between how the various countries are viewing it and how they approach it, because it's an issue of national security. So the national security perspective comes in. It comes in with a certain amount of national interest in what they're protecting. But I would agree with the ambassador when he says that there is the strong condemnation from the BRICS nations. And you would note that all of these countries at some level or the other have faced the scourge of terrorism, have faced this threat. So there is a consensus that terrorism in all forms and all its nature should be seen as a criminal act against humanity. And that is the motivation that we have here. India has been trying to raise the issue for a very long time because we've been suffering from terrorism for a very long time. It is now that other countries have joined us in that voice against terrorism and to take strong action against not just terror groups, but also those states and organizations that support these terror groups. So I think while there is a certain difference in terms of how nation states approach the problem of terrorism, how they look at how they want to resolve it, how they want to address the challenges that it comes with, the broader framework for all nations, not just in BRICS that we have, but our partner nations as well of the BRICS, in the G77, in the G20, all of them have come to realize that terrorism as a whole is now a problem, as a challenge which needs to be addressed. So I think this BRICS declaration and the fact that the Pahalgam attacks were mentioned in their full scale is a welcome step. It is a step which shows that the other countries have also joined in India in these efforts to condemn terrorists, to raise it on an international platform so that this issue does not get sidelined at any cost. It is now an international threat. And we want to project that it's not just coming from national perspective, it is coming from a perspective of how security in a region is threatened. It then impacts the other countries as well. So I think there would be a momentum and it will go forward.
Certainly, that's what's important, that members and partners of India go beyond the general condemnations, and all of this fructifies into some kind of action-oriented mechanism. Only then our efforts will perhaps fructify into significant outcomes, something that we've been pushing for. Another key aspect of the Prime Minister's intervention was on artificial intelligence and responsible innovation. Ambassador, the Prime Minister urged members of the BRICS to lead on responsible AI while promoting innovation. Now, what kind of leadership role do you think BRICS members, particularly India, play in shaping global norms, policies around the use of AI?
I think for the entire world, including Global South, a new challenge which is emerging is artificial intelligence with unknown capabilities and ever-expanding capabilities, and with high population density countries like India and most of the Global South, Brazil and Indonesia, and it could have a huge impact even on employment, etc. So now the most important thing is that in this new emerging field, in new emerging area, the rule making should not be in the hands of the global north. Whether it is internet and many other emerging technologies, we find, the standards are set by the north, whether it is Google, the internet, everything is in English, and what should be done, what should not be done, what kind of regulation should be there, not there. These are very important issues for the development of artificial intelligence for the global south. For instance, United States want proprietary artificial intelligence. Whoever creates that, they should have patent and they should have commercial benefit. But India, some other countries have a more inclusive approach, that it should be open AI, like the Chinese one is practically open for the world. So there are competing models, and everything is in a state of flux. It is all work in progress. So it is extremely important that the thinking minds, policymakers of global south come together and have a position to protect their interests, safeguard their interests. And that's why Prime Minister, looking ahead, proposed that AI Impact Summit in India next year, 1926. I think our Prime Minister is very conscious of the both the positive possibilities, positive impact of artificial intelligence going forward, and also its possible negative fallout on the world, including on the global south. And that is perhaps will be debated. So the Prime Minister is taking a very forward-looking position, a very proactive position in this matter, putting India in the leadership, in the forefront of the developed artificial intelligence.
Let me also get in Dr. Banerjee's perspective on this, and especially in context of the concern that the ambassador raised, Dr. Banerjee. Countries, especially those in the global north, we are seeing they're already moving fast with AI governance models and regulations. Now, where do you see BRICS coming in, offering an alternative vision, perhaps one that's more inclusive and development focused, something that Prime Minister Modi has spoken about and has put it as central to his address, especially in context of artificial intelligence and sharing development models with countries in the global south?
I think it's a very pertinent issue that you've raised, and as the ambassador said, there are both negatives and positives to the development of AI. And our AI policy has been that it is artificial intelligence for all. We're looking at a very inclusive environment in which we're doing open AI. So everybody is included in it, everybody contributes to it. And I think the reason we are consistently looking at a voice of the global south in development of AI governance is for a very simple reason. Not only is AI development dominated by the global north, the fact is the global south also does not have the understanding of AI, it does not have the capabilities to develop it, nor does it have the capacity to absorb the changes that this technology is going to bring about. And because they're going to be the ones who are going to actually face the maximum impact, there is a need for global governance on AI to have a voice of the global south in it. So I think when we're talking about BRICS as an institution in which India is playing such an important role, and it wants BRICS to also be part of the global governance on AI, the entire debate. I think India is pushing for that very much because the BRICS as a whole is now slowly becoming a voice of the global south. Like the ambassador said, it's not a homogeneous voice, but it is a voice nonetheless. And to have a voice is to make yourself heard. And I think that is what India's goal is, that when global governance on AI is being discussed, these countries which till now have very limited understanding and capabilities to develop it, there are threats. First, they should be made to understand how is it going to impact their everyday lives, and thereafter get the concerns they have and build it into an AI governance model, which would ensure that the opportunities are there a lot more and the challenges are reduced, and the risk of AI being used for malicious use or weaponized is reduced as much as possible.
Dr. Banerjee, there was also a strong economic underpinning in the Prime Minister's suggestions, and especially the focus on resilient supply chains for critical minerals. How strategic is this move according to you? How could it benefit countries in the Global South?
I think it's a very important aspect of India's overall strategy. And I think we have always been a country which has built up on partnerships. We always said that we're not doing this alone. We want it to be done with our partners, because India's growth, India's prosperity can only be achieved if everybody around it is equally prosperous and, there is stability. So when we're talking about critical supply chains, especially in terms of critical minerals, they are what is going to be the driving force of your economies going forward. Therefore, a secure, reliable supply chain of these minerals, these technologies, etc., is very important. And this would be very important not just for the Indian economy, it would be very important for Global South economies, which are developing, and they would be developing in a very changed environment, a technologically changed environment than what the development we have seen in economic models of the past. And this technology is an everyday change. So these economies are developing in a very, very challenged space, where they do not have the capacity, the financial resources to address the challenges at the same time. So I think a collective approach that has been highlighted by India through the BRICS is the way forward.
Ambassador, I'll take one last question from you, and this relates to the 4 key suggestions that the Prime Minister made to make BRICS an even more effective platform. He called for a demand-driven, sustainable approach by the new development bank. Now, do you see the NDB emerging as a serious alternative to the financial institutions which are currently being led by the Western countries when it comes to funding Global South priorities? And I ask you this because the Prime Minister did keep the Global South at the heart of his address. So the 2 key sessions that he addressed, the focus remained on countries in the Global South and an inclusive, holistic development that he sees for this region.
NDB, with the total capital of $100 billion and paid up is up, I think, about $40 billion, is really not a match to World Bank and the regional banks like ADB, etc. But it can help in changing the standards and norms for lending, which sometimes World Bank imposes impossible conditions on the borrowers. On environment, on labor laws, because the situations are different. You can't ask somebody who is in grade 5 to pass the exam of MA. They have to understand that different countries are at different stages of development, and they have to be supported on the ladder of development, and very stringent conditions which should be applicable only on the global north should not be imposed on the global south. So NDB, I think, has a very important role in putting an alternative model of lending, which takes these concerns of the Global South also into account while adopting and assessing and vetting any proposal for borrowing.
Certainly. So with that, we'll have to wrap up the conversation. What we've discussed is that the Prime Minister did make significant assertions about which we've spoken at the BRICS Summit, which focused on inclusive and development-oriented approach, but at the same time signaled a new phase in India's global diplomacy, perhaps, where we are not just participating, but also in many ways shaping the narrative for the developing countries, particularly in the Global South. With that, we'll have to wrap up the conversation. Once again, thank you very much, Ambassador and Dr. Banerjee, for joining us on the program and sharing valuable insights with us and our viewers. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well.
To watch more programs of Sansad TV, subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to like and share them.